Hello, I'm Alan Todd. In spite of extensive security cameras in galleries, of cameras in streets whereby you can be tracked across an entire city, thieves continue to steal works of art. Some of those come from galleries, some from private houses, some even from estates where you'd think they were probably safe. In 2018, I went to England. I was brought up about 20 miles north of London in Hertfordshire. Just down the road was where Henry Moore worked, or one of the places he worked. His sculpture garden or his sculpture estate is still there. I thought, yeah, I'm here, I may as well go and have a look. I got as far as the gate, only to find the entire place locked up. Some time previous, someone had brought in a flatbed truck and a crane and had taken away a bronze sculpture weighing several tons. It was gone. The police said more than likely it would never be recovered, that it had been melted down for the value of the scrap metal. Oh, you can imagine what I felt at this point. A great fan of Henry Moore, here is a work gone forever. Now, there's nothing unusual, unfortunately, about works of art disappearing. Every year, hundreds of paintings are stolen, many are never recovered, and surprisingly, according to the Italian police, a lot of them are cut into pieces and sold off as separate bits. You think, oh, what's the value in that? But apparently there is. Then there was Caravaggio's masterpiece, Nativity with St. Francis and St. Lawrence. It was stolen from a Palermo church some 50 years ago and kept in the home of a mafia boss. Well, the mafia keeps coming up. He looked to ransom it back to the Catholic Church. He figured they were worth a penny or two. So he cut off a piece of the canvas and sent it to them. Well, this became the first of many attempts to do exactly the same thing, and a term, art napping, had to be coined to cover this angle. Now, it has gone on ever since then, not just 50 years ago. Works being stolen and then attempts made to sell them back to the owner, well, there's nothing new about that. In the same bracket would have to go those thieves who decide to steal paintings which are world famous and printed in all the books. Under that category goes Munch's The Scream and Monet's Impression Sunrise. Thieves bought tickets to the Musée Marmottan in 1985, bailed up the 9 guards and 40 visitors at gunpoint, and walked out with a number of works which they carted away in a black station wagon, all of which was recorded on film. They were eventually caught. Of course, it did help that all the paintings they stole were small enough to fit under the arm. So in some ways, I guess, you have to blame Van Gogh or any of the people who went out and painted en plein air, because they couldn't paint any bigger and get it back home again. So they became targets. Munch's Scream, however, was stolen from the Munch Museum in Oslo during the 1984 Winter Olympics. Well, that lent a lot of value to the story, of course. Lillehammer was just down the road. But again, the Scream? Why would anybody think they could actually get rid of it afterwards? If you watch enough films about the theft of anything, you might come to believe that all thieves are in the genius category. The degree of planning, the audaciousness of what they do, the size of what they're trying to steal, all lends itself to this idea, mostly myth, that these are exceptional people. This doesn't actually hold much water when it comes to art. For instance, several works were stolen from the Whitworth Art Gallery in Manchester in 2003. The robber broke into the museum at night, used a sledgehammer, and however he did it, got past various layers of security. Apparently, he was a computer expert. The usual targets of Van Gogh, Picasso and Gauguin were discovered the next day in a cardboard tube in a rundown toilet not far from the museum. Well, the press amused themselves and had a field day when they dubbed it the Louvre, as in, toilet humour being the staple of tabloid news. What made the news, though, wasn't so much the painting that was stolen, but the message left behind by the thief. In an act of what he undoubtedly would have called social responsibility, he used the hacker defense, wherein he was doing everyone a favour by pointing out the level of lax security. Needless to say, the expected plaudits were slow in coming. When a Tiepolo was stolen from a church in Venice, everyone suspected an American millionaire. Okay, it was actually found a few days later. It had been taken by a drug addict who then had no idea what to do with it. The idea of intelligent thieves, as much urban myth as anything else. There is no doubt, however, that Rembrandt would have been surprised that he holds the Guinness Book of Records for the most stolen work. Jacob de Grain III was stolen in 1966, 1973, 1981 and 1983. This wasn't a seminal work like Impression Sunrise, but a standard commercial portrait for a businessman client in 1632. Other than art connoisseurs, few would even have heard of it, but it would still have been very difficult to shift once it had been stolen. Well, obviously there must have been some appeal to have it go out the door 4 times in a row. It's now back where it belongs. There were plenty of other favoured targets. Well, Picasso, Matisse, Braque, Gauguin, in fact any of the early 20th century masters had been stolen at one time or another. However, you'd think any thief with brains would have realised it was going to be not just difficult to sell the Mona Lisa, but impossible. I can't imagine what the Italian handyman who stole it in 1911 thought he was going to do with it. I suppose he could hang it over his fireplace. He certainly couldn't sell it or even tell anybody about it. Well, he was caught and the painting was returned. Well, a version of it anyway. From my understanding is there's actually more than one of them. While so many paintings were never recovered, the number of thieves and handlers incarcerated across the world ought to prove a salutary lesson. But apparently the criminal classes see prison as little more than an occupational hazard, and the routine theft of art will, I suppose, continue. Some thieves took the location of stolen works to the grave. If there are still any Nazis alive and living in South America, they aren't telling the world where all of the stolen art went. There have been people looking for it for half a century now in covered mine shafts and wherever else, without luck. One amusing question, though, is what, beyond the works of the earlier 20th century and the old masters, is worth stealing now? You don't hear much about contemporary or current artists having their work stolen. A lot has been imitated, but that's a different question entirely. The market for fraud and copies of work seems to be expanding. If you think, though, at a recent Sotheby's auction, a Gerhard Richter sold for, I think, 25 million, it would seem to be a candidate. Somehow I doubt anybody's going to be stealing it. For all the price that's been paid for it, I doubt anybody would actually think about stealing the thing as an icon or anything. And in fact, Richter has produced so much work, they're all across the world, every gallery's got one, every collector's got one, so it's hardly a novelty. As artists, we would probably know whether someone was planning on stealing one of our works. I say from personal experience that it is possible. A few years ago, I had a sculpture stolen from the garden, not overly large, made of steel. It disappeared in the middle of the night. As yet I haven't had any ransom demands for it, and it may never turn up again. Whether it's worth anything, whether it was worth it to the thieves, I have no idea. But given the intelligence of art thieves, they probably stood it in the garden where it promptly rusted away.